The year is 30 BC. In the grand Egyptian capital of Alexandria, panic grips the streets. The mighty Roman fleet looms on the horizon, bringing with it fire and destruction. Within a half-finished mausoleum, Cleopatra and her lover, Mark Antony, await their inevitable fate. Antony, the once great general, lies wounded, his stomach sliced open. He knows the end is near. As the sound of Roman boots echoes through the streets, he requests one final cup of wine. With Cleopatra by his side, he lifts the cup in a final toast before darkness overtakes him. The deaths of Mark Antony and Cleopatra would become some of the most famous in history. Immortalized by ancient storytellers, transformed into tragedy by Shakespeare, and adapted countless times. But how well do we truly know the man whose death signaled the birth of an empire? Mark Antony's early life was far from remarkable. Born on January 14, 83 BC, he hailed from a wealthy family, though not a particularly respected one. His father was an inept general, and while his mother was a cousin of Julius Caesar, Caesar himself was just an unremarkable 17-year-old at the time. As a young man, Antony squandered his wealth on pleasures, gambling, women, and extravagance. By the time he was 20, he had amassed a staggering debt of 250 talents, equivalent to millions of dollars today. Desperate, he fled to Greece under the guise of studying philosophy. In reality, he continued his reckless ways, indulging in the bohemian lifestyle of Athens. Yet amidst the indulgence, he developed a deep appreciation for Hellenistic culture, a passion that would shape his later years. At 26, Antony's fate took a sharp turn. A Roman general named Aulus Gabinius convinced him to abandon his reckless lifestyle and join a military campaign in Syria. Antony agreed, perhaps expecting adventure, but what he found instead was his true calling: war. In Syria, he proved himself a formidable cavalryman, gaining recognition for his prowess on the battlefield. His success led him to Egypt, where the Romans were suppressing revolts against Ptolemy XII. It was there, in the heart of Alexandria, that Antony first encountered a young girl of extraordinary presence, a teenage Cleopatra. Antony did not immediately pursue Cleopatra. Instead, he left Egypt to fight in Gaul under Julius Caesar, now a rising power in Rome. By 54 BC, Caesar had become one of the most influential men in the Republic, a key figure in the First Triumvirate. Under his command, Antony flourished, not just as a soldier, but as a leader, earning the loyalty of his men. By 50 BC, with the conquest of Gaul complete, Caesar sent Antony back to Rome to serve as tribune. But Rome was on the brink of chaos. Caesar's former ally, Pompey, was maneuvering to force him into surrendering his army. The Republic stood divided. Antony, ever loyal to Caesar, openly opposed Pompey, igniting political tensions that led to his exile. Fleeing to Caesar's camp, he reached the banks of a small river, the Rubicon. It was here that history was made. In 49 BC, Caesar made the fateful decision to cross the Rubicon with his army, an act of defiance that set Rome on the path to civil war. With Antony by his side, Caesar marched on Rome, forcing Pompey to flee. With the city under their control, Caesar named Antony his administrator, a role Antony proved woefully inadequate for. His negligence nearly incited a revolt, and when Caesar returned from Egypt in 46 BC, he was so appalled by Antony's mismanagement that he dismissed him from office. To make matters worse, Caesar returned with Cleopatra, his new lover and the mother of his son Caesarion. Antony, once smitten by the Egyptian queen, now found himself cast aside. But Antony's troubles were far from over. In 45 BC, Caesar chose a new protege, his young great-nephew, Octavian. Weak and sickly, Octavian seemed an unlikely successor, yet his ambition knew no bounds. Antony, still licking his wounds in Gaul, had no idea that his greatest rival had just entered the stage. In 44 BC, the tides of fate shifted once more. Back in Rome, whispers of Caesar's growing power troubled the Senate. Then in February, Antony made a disastrous misstep. During a public ceremony, he attempted to place a laurel crown upon Caesar's head, symbolizing kingship. Caesar refused, but the damage was done. The Senate feared he sought absolute rule. On the Ides of March, Caesar was summoned to the Senate. Antony, receiving a last-minute warning of the conspiracy, rushed to intervene. But it was too late. Caesar was assassinated by his own senators, his blood staining the marble floors of the Curia. Antony fled, fearing he would be next. But the assassins had miscalculated. They had slain Caesar, yet left his allies untouched. When Antony realized no one was coming for him, he returned to Rome, reclaiming his position. Seeking clarity, he opened Caesar's will, expecting recognition for his loyalty. Instead, he found betrayal. Caesar had left him nothing. The dictator's wealth and legacy had been granted to Octavian, who was now named his legal heir. The rivalry between Antony and Octavian had begun. At Caesar's funeral, Antony delivered a fiery eulogy, brandishing the bloodstained toga and inciting the people against the assassins. Rome erupted into chaos, forcing the conspirators to flee. But Antony's goal was not vengeance, it was power. He sought to claim Caesar's position, but Octavian had other plans. When Octavian revealed that Antony was negotiating with the Senate, the young heir turned the people against him. With Rome on the verge of war, Antony gathered an army and marched to Cisalpine Gaul, seeking to crush one of Caesar's assassins, Decimus Brutus. The Senate, viewing Antony as a threat, sent Octavian to oppose him. Instead of clashing, the two rivals saw an opportunity. Together they could seize Rome. Thus in 43 BC, Antony, Octavian, and their ally Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate, a new ruling force that would dominate the Republic. Their first act? Revenge. Marching east in 42 BC, Antony and Octavian pursued Caesar's true killers, Brutus and Cassius. The final battle came in October, where Antony led a decisive charge that crushed Brutus's army. Facing defeat, Brutus fell upon his own sword. The assassins were dead. The war was over. But Antony's greatest battle was yet to come. He and Octavian may have ruled Rome together, but they both knew only one of them could emerge as its sole master. The question was no longer if their alliance would shatter, but when. And at the heart of Antony's fate, waiting across the sea in Egypt, was Cleopatra. The woman who had once charmed him as a girl was about to change his life forever and ultimately lead him to his doom. With the empire divided, Octavian set sail for Rome, leaving Mark Antony to rule the vast eastern lands. But what does a man do when he holds such power, standing at the pinnacle of his ambitions? For Antony, the answer was clear. He sought to impress a woman, and not just any woman, the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. Their fateful meeting in Tarsus was orchestrated by Antony, but it was Cleopatra who commanded the stage. Arriving on a barge with silver oars, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, she was a vision unlike anything the Roman general had ever seen. Music filled the air as attendants adorned in divine elegance catered to her every whim. To Antony, who had long admired both Cleopatra and Hellenistic culture, this was a dream come to life. That winter, Antony followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria. What began as a strategic alliance soon blossomed into something far greater. Together, they formed an elite circle known as the Society of Inimitable Livers, indulging in lavish feasts, fine wines, and midnight escapades through the city streets, disguised as commoners. By day, they hunted. By night, they reveled. Slowly, inevitably, they fell in love. Yet Antony never lost sight of power. His ambitions remained fixed on Rome. Meanwhile, his political maneuvering set the stage for another confrontation with Octavian. But while Antony played at rebellion from afar, Octavian was in Rome, consolidating power. When the Second Triumvirate was renewed in 37 BC, Antony was supposed to receive legions from Octavian in exchange for ships. But Octavian, ever the master of deception, sent nothing in return. Antony had been outplayed, humiliated before the Roman world. Determined to prove his might, Antony set his sights on a grand campaign that would cement his legacy, a conquest of Parthia. But Parthia was no easy prey. It had humbled Rome before, and it would do so again. Caught in the unforgiving terrain, Antony's army was decimated by brutal weather and relentless enemy raids. A quarter of his men perished, and he returned to Alexandria, his dreams of glory in ruins. Back in Egypt, Antony drifted further into Cleopatra's world. He adopted Eastern customs, adorned himself in foreign attire, and lavished titles upon her and their children. To Rome, it was a betrayal. Octavian capitalized on this, painting Antony as a man bewitched by an exotic queen, forsaking his Roman duty. Then came Antony's greatest blunder. He declared Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, as the true heir of Rome. It was an open challenge to Octavian's claim. For Octavian, there was no turning back. Antony had to be destroyed. Octavian struck first, seizing Antony's will from the sacred temple and exposing it to the Roman people. Within its pages lay Antony's treachery, his intent to grant the Eastern Empire to Cleopatra and their children. The Senate erupted in fury, branding Antony a traitor. War was declared. With 400 ships, Antony and Cleopatra sailed to war. But Octavian was relentless. He blockaded Antony's forces, trapping them in a small bay. For months, disease and starvation ravaged Antony's men. Desperation mounted. And when battle finally came on September 2nd, 31 BC, it was disaster. Octavian's navy shattered Antony's fleet. As the chaos unfolded, Antony and Cleopatra fled. Returning to Alexandria, they found themselves cornered. Octavian was coming, and there would be no mercy. Yet Antony clung to hope. They sent envoys seeking negotiation. Octavian laughed. There would be no peace. As the days waned, Antony and Cleopatra retreated into fantasy. They feasted, they drank, they spoke of victories that would never come. And then on August 1st, 30 BC, the end arrived. As Antony prepared for one last stand, his navy and army surrendered without a fight. Betrayed and abandoned, Antony returned to Cleopatra, only to be told she had already taken her own life. With nothing left, he fell upon his sword. Yet death did not come swiftly. He lay bleeding, clinging to life. Then came the truth. Cleopatra was alive. Summoning his last strength, Antony was carried to her side. As Cleopatra wept, Antony raised a cup, took one final drink, and breathed his last. Days later, Cleopatra too would end her life, refusing to be paraded as Octavian's trophy. With her death, Egypt fell, and Octavian stood as the uncontested ruler of Rome. In time, Antony's name faded, overshadowed by Octavian, now Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Yet history would not forget him. His tale is one of power and passion, of ambition and downfall. It is a myth, yet a myth that truly happened. And in retelling his story, we glimpse a man who lived, fought, and loved on a scale few could ever dream of. He may not have worn the imperial crown, but Mark Antony remains a colossus of history, forever entwined with the fate of an empire and the heart of a queen.